Okay, really quick before I get into the meat of the video, go down to the comments and answer a question for me. If you got a 3D printer, what is the very first thing you would do with it? Besides printing a little boat. I asked myself that question for a long time and never really came up with an answer until the day I got a 3D printer. For those of you that pay attention, watch my last couple videos, you may have noticed the very large box behind me. I got this thing for Christmas this year, and like I said, I never really landed on what I would make first until I was literally asked by the person who gave it to me as a Christmas gift. When asked, I immediately blurted out, "Organize the cables and other stuff under my desk." So, while this might not be the sexiest first thing to make with a 3D printer, apparently I hate disorganized desks so much that I spontaneously decided it would be the very first thing I would do. Now, most of the time you don't see this angle in my office, but I have a ton of stuff wired into this desk, and my goal is to make it seem like there is barely anything. And honestly, that's just not how it looks right now. As you can see, my previous solution was to make this giant wood box and mount it to the underside of the desk in the back. It worked for a while, but honestly, I think I can do better than that. So just to give you an idea of the monumental task in front of me, here's a list of all the stuff that currently lives attached to this desk. 1, 2 laptops, work and personal. 2, a wide curved monitor, obviously. 3, a Scarlett Solo digital audio thing. 4, a webcam, namely the Insta360 link. 5, a teleprompter. Come on, you must realize I use a teleprompter by now, right? 6, a Stream Deck Plus. 7, a USB-C hub that connects all this stuff together. 8, many power cables for all this stuff. 9, a motion sensor for my lights. 10, a power strip. And finally, my other microphone. Okay, you get the point, right? The desk is small and the stuff is numerous. The cables need to be managed, and I just don't want them all dangling around anymore. Oh, and here's the other thing. I've wanted a 3D printer for a long time, but probably like most people, I didn't have any idea how to actually make stuff to be 3D printed. Sure, I watched lots of YouTube and I'll post all the primer videos I watched on my website, link in the description, but watching people model things and learning how to model things are completely different beasts. By the way, if you haven't seen my previous video about the channel name change and some of the content changes I'm making, I'll put a link up here. This video and a majority of the videos I make into the future will have a blog post where I'll list every single bit of media that I consumed while learning the stuff I did in this video. As a way to see where I have more details, this little logo is going to appear in the screen whenever I'm talking about something I learned and I've referenced stuff on my website. This is obviously going to be way easier than me saying, "There's a link in the description" a million times during the video. Anyways, back to the show. Getting into 3D printing can have a huge learning curve. Just to make something and 3D print it, you need to know a few things at least. 1, you need to understand a little bit about 3D printing filaments. If you're new to 3D printing, just start with PLA, honestly. Unless you need something to be like much stronger or stand up to heat, in that case, you're going to try PETG. Both are easy to find and both are pretty easy to print without making a giant mess. Number 2 is the 3D modeling software. I downloaded Fusion 360 and banged my head on the desk for days until I eventually kind of figured it out. Sure, it wasn't pretty and I'm no expert, but I made the stuff. And choosing a 3D modeling program was probably the first thing I needed to learn and the first decision I had to make when getting started. So if you're in that boat right now, I read and watched a bunch of stuff on many different modeling programs out there and finally landed on Fusion 360. And here's why. It really came down to the fact that I could find many tutorials on how to use Fusion, and that would allow me to learn 3D modeling stuff faster. And that's a great tip, by the way, if you're trying to learn fast. Find the thing that has the most detail online. It's going to help you learn it faster. If you pick something obscure because you think it's better, and then you go back and you try to find material on how to learn it, you're going to have a hard time. And number 3 is the slicer. Oh my God. So there's a ton of settings in the slicer. Essentially, for those of you that don't know, the slicer takes your 3D model and makes it into instructions for the printer. It kind of slices it into layers, and that's why it's called a slicer. You can do a ton of stuff in the slicer program, and there are a bunch of different ones. I know this is going to be boring, but since I have a Bamboo Labs printer, I just use the Bamboo slicer. this is my fastest route. So after figuring those three things out, here's what I made. And I'm gonna make all these models available just in case you somehow have exactly the same problem I have. By the way, if you do have the exact same desk and the exact same hardware, please leave a comment. That would be totally weird, and I definitely want to know. All right, let's get into it. Number one is this little bracket thing for my USB hub. Now, admittedly, this was probably not the first thing I should have made, but it was the first thing that came to mind. It's kind of complicated. It took a few tries, but essentially it's two pieces that screw into the desk on the underside. The hub slides in, and there's the little springy notches things that hold it in place as it slides in. One of the primary things I learned when making this is that you are often way better off making something that is multiple parts instead of trying to make a big, complicated thing. Obviously, with this thing, since it was two sides, I didn't have to worry about the width and getting the width exactly right. I could just put them together, slap it up there, put the part in there, and everything worked. The second thing that I learned was how to make parts designed to flex. It's a somewhat complicated topic, but there's some really good tutorials out there. All right, number two, simple but effective, this little bracket that holds the power brick for the USB hub. On its own, it's not fancy, but it does fit perfectly above the laptop mounting bracket. And I'll get to the laptop mounting bracket in a second. This looks so simple, but understanding how to orient things for 3D printing is super important. It allows you to save material and selectively choose which parts of your design should be the strongest. Okay, and speaking of the laptop bracket, like I mentioned before, I have two laptops. Switching between them is pretty easy since I just take the single USB cable and plug it from one into the other. But I needed a way to store them under the desk without them taking up too much space. So this custom laptop mount is spec'd to the thickness of my two MacBooks. The newer one is from work and it's thinner. The older one is my personal MacBook Pro. That's the reason I had to make this, because I found a lot of different brackets out there, but they were designed for two of the same computer, and that's unfortunately not what I have. They fit very snug into this bracket with a couple little felt pads so the computers don't get scratched up. This print didn't exactly turn out great because I just simply didn't know that shallow angles and overhangs don't really print well, especially in PETG, which I used because I wanted it to be stronger. You know, oh well, it doesn't really matter. I wasn't about to do them again, and they're super solid otherwise. And they're under my desk. Literally no one's gonna see them. Except for all of you. So after the fact on this one, I went back and learned about overhangs and bridges. I also learned a bit about slicer settings, but honestly not even close to enough. It's a topic that I need to learn more about. I knew just enough to get what I needed. Everything else I can learn later. Okay, number four. Now I think this one might be useful to others. I made a cable tray that can be printed in small segments and then snapped together. I also ran out of filament, so some are blue and some are black. That's why it looks that way in the video. Also, the one on the end is slightly different, so it doesn't have the snap fits like sticking off the outside of it. This is obviously the workhorse of the cable management under this desk. It's designed to fit perfectly within the dimensions of the desk and its various supports, and I can just run all the extra cables into here and poof, they're gone, no longer in sight. Okay, number five. I started getting fancy. And speaking of fancy, this desk reorg is really just the beginning. Those of you paying attention may have noticed that the stuff behind me is missing some blinky network activity that used to be there in other videos. Get subscribed to the channel to see what I made to handle all my home lab computing and networking equipment. I literally just finished it, and there's going to be a whole video coming soon. Anyways, back to getting fancy. I never really liked having my large microphone attached to this cheap arm on my desk, so I made a mic stand. And this one, you know, took a little bit of thinking. I'm pretty proud of it. It has the XLR cable running through it and even a custom mount, so it looks like the other side of the XLR cable is actually a plug. It turned out really, really great. And it all just screws together with 3D printed threads. Except for the mic mount, that's a real screw. So honestly, this is the very first thing I made that I felt actually looked like good. It has threads, it has clearances, it has several components that fit together. So many different little things to consider. Number six, onto the teleprompter. This is the Elgato prompter, and it is amazing. Literally, this thing saves me hours on videos I make. Plus, it's great for video conferencing since you can actually look at the people you're talking to. It uses a monitor that's flipped and mirrored, so you can just drag like anything onto it. But the universal camera mount left a little bit to be desired. I don't know if you've seen these things, but man, is it hideous. I was going through all this work to make everything super clean, but had this like curtain thing hanging off the back of the prompter. So I thought, you know, why not make a custom enclosure for my webcam? So that's what I did. This one's printed in 3 pieces that snap together, and it uses the mounting screws that came with the prompter. Then my camera sits inside this little tray and slides into the box that I made, and problem solved. Honestly, this thing is so cool, and I had to learn so much about 3D printing to make it properly. And now that I'm thinking about it, this is probably worth a video on its own, so I think I'll do that. Get subscribed to the channel or leave a comment if you want to see a video on that, or if you just want the STL files. Okay, one more. I made a video a couple back about automating my office lighting using a motion controller to know if I'm in the room. Well, after a few weeks, I was pretty happy with the performance of it, so I decided to make it permanent. I printed a mount that fits into a grommet in the hole in my desk. This is made to hold a Adafruit Perma Proto board. So if you have a similar need, this is a simple kind of like grab and print. The link is in the description. And oh man, side note on this one, printing clear filament is a rabbit hole. Bottom line, I gotta be honest with you, it's not really possible to completely print clear. But you can make clear filament look pretty good if you do it all exactly right and you used all the right settings. So with all of that done, this is the result. Here's a bottom-up shot from the underside of my desk, and here's some glamour shots of everything in its super clean glory. 3D modeling is something that can take forever to learn, but there's a few really great YouTube series that really got me started. Again, I'm not an expert, and I honestly never intend on being one. Just getting started, crash course style, really allowed me to use the software and finally play with my new toy. Since making all these things, I know I could go back and I could make them better, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just get started and refine your skills as you go. All right, so this one's gone on long enough. Thanks for stopping by and staying to the end. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm trying out a new format, and I've made a blog post that provides all the content I consumed while learning essentially how to use a 3D printer from scratch. Check it out, tell me what you think, and until next time, I hope I helped you learn faster.